The Dogmatika engine is a series of 5 main deck cards which can allow you to do the following things without using your normal summon. Non-target negate during your opponent's turn with Dogmatika Fleur-de-Lis, a +1 Raigeki break with Dogmatika Punishment, which gains you advantage instead of losing it, a straight +2 in card advantage with Dogmatika Maximus, by sending 2 extra deck monsters of your choice to the graveyard, a Searcher which is also a +1, similar to Engage, and the main Searcher of the archetype which can set the whole ball rolling without using your normal summon. In order to play this engine, all you need are up to 3 copies of Ecclesia, as many copies of Nadir's Servant are currently legal, 1 Maximus, 1 Fleur-de-Lis, and 1 Shadow Schism if you're playing the Shadow engine alongside it, and if you can afford the restrictions, up to 3 Dogmatika Punishments, usually 1. Now, the extra deck is equally as important as the main deck, where you want to play Elder Entity Natis and Tatini Clad the Ash Dragon. And if you're playing the Shadow engine, you also want El Shadow App Cologne, Construct, and Window. And then you're pretty much good to go. Now let's go over what all these cards do. The main combo for all the Dogmatika engine pieces are Dogmatika Ecclesia, which can special summon itself from your hand if there's an extra deck monster on either player's side of the field. So this engine can be used without taking up your normal summon, and simply adds any Dogmatika card, monster, spell, or trap, when it's normal or special summon. However, with the caveat where you cannot special summon monsters from your extra deck for the rest of this turn, an effect a lot of the Dogmatika cards have. This restriction can be entirely avoided if you simply summon Dogmatika Ecclesia last, after you've done all your plays already, since the restriction does not care if you summon from the extra deck before you use the effect. And in fact, in most cases is kind of required in order to special summon her from your hand. So Ecclesia allows you to search a card on its special summon with its special summon that's incredibly easy to activate, and having a restriction that's very easy to play around makes it pretty obvious why this card sees so much play as an engine piece in all kinds of different kinds of decks that are able to play it, as it just adds immediate value to a lot of decks because of a lot of the targets Ecclesia can search out. One of those targets is Dogmatika Maximus. This card has the effect to send 2 different monsters from your extra deck to the graveyard. However, your opponent must also send 2 monsters from their extra deck to the graveyard, which means its effect does not work on players who do not use an extra deck, although this is generally beneficial, as a lot of decks don't play cards with good floating effects like yours will. In order to bring up Maximus, you do need to banish 1 extra deck monster from your graveyard though. Dogmatika Fleur-de-Lis can special summon itself from your hand if there is simply an extra deck monster on the field, similar to Ecclesia. It also has an extra effect if there's already a Dogmatika monster on your side of the field when it's summoned, where you can non-target negate the effects of a monster on the field until the end of the turn. And its special summon is a quick effect from your hand, which means you can actually just hold on to Fleur-de-Lis until your opponent is about to use an effect that you want to interrupt. However, since the card requires 2 conditions for its negate, i.e. a special summon monster on the field and a Dogmatika card on your side of the field, it can be excluded from some Dogmatika engines if all you care about is sending monsters from the extra deck to the graveyard, and not this card's negate. There's also Nadir's Servant, which allows you to send an extra deck monster to the graveyard in order to search out a Dogmatika card with less attack from either your deck or graveyard. And finally, there's Dogmatika Punishment, which allows you to send a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard to destroy a face-up monster your opponent controls with an equal to or less attack than that monster's. However, it then locks you from special summoning from your extra deck until the end of your next turn, which means a lot of people opt to not play Dogmatika Punishment at all, because it does completely lock you out of your extra deck during your next turn, so it's not as easy to play around as a lot of the other Dogmatika restrictions, even if the effect itself could potentially be a +1 in card event. And finally, there's the best targets to send to the extra deck to the graveyard. First up, we have Elder Entity Natis, which has a floating effect to destroy any card in the field, and is not once per turn. So if you send this card to the graveyard with Dogmatika Punishment, you can basically destroy 2 of your opponent's cards during their turn, which is a straight +1 in card economy, just as long as the target Dogmatika Punishment has 2500 or less attack. Next up, we have El Shaddai App Cologne. This card's floating effect allows you to search any Shadow card from your deck or graveyard, but then requires you to discard 1. This gives you access to the Shadow extra deck package as long as you're playing a single copy of Shadow Schism in your main deck, as Shadow Schism will allow you to use App Cologne in your graveyard plus a light or dark monster in order to bring out El Shaddai Construct or Window, which are 2 really good cards to go into, especially since you only have to play a single extra main deck card in order to gain access to these cards. So this is why the Shadow package is usually played alongside Dogmatika engines, although not always, because it does require 3 extra deck spaces and 1 more additional main deck space. Next, we have Titanic Clad the Ash Dragon. This card's floating effect is during the end phase, you can add to your hand or special summon from your deck a Dogmatika card. So you can use this card to special summon Dogmatika Ecclesia, who will then search out a Dogmatika card, making it essentially a +2 in card advantage. And if you search out Dogmatika Ecclesia and add a Dogmatika Fleur-de-Lis, this basically sets up a monster negate during the end phase. You may notice that the 3 best targets to send from the X deck to the graveyard all have 2500 attack exactly, which means decks that have monsters with over 2500 attack can innately play around Dogmatika Punishment a lot easier. Now, there are 3 other cards worth noting. There's Fossil Warrior Skull Knight, which has an effect in the graveyard where you can banish it to destroy 1 monster on the field. Wind Pegasus Adignister, which has a graveyard effect that if a card you control is destroyed, you can banish it from your graveyard to spin one of your opponent's cards. And finally, Herald of the Arc Light, which has a floating effect to search out any ritual spell or monster card from your deck to your hand. And there are other more niche targets, but these are generally the best ones. Now, which decks can play the Dogmatika engine? Well, the engine can fit in pretty much any deck that has the space for the engine in their main deck or extra deck. If you absolutely have no free spaces in your extra deck, which some archetypes definitely fall under the threshold, then you can't really play the engine because part of its benefits are being able to send choice extra deck monsters with powerful floating effects to the graveyard, and not whatever your main engine pieces are. If you're not able to take advantage of cards like Elder Entity Natis, Titanic or Apkallone, then it's not really worth running the engine. If your deck doesn't use the extra deck at all, then it's the perfect inclusion, as you can just add all of the best extra deck floating effects you want. The engine doesn't take up your normal summon, and has a restriction that's easy to play around outside of Dogmatika Punishment. So, if you need some on-demand destruction, negation, or just extra card advantage, and don't want to play a whole bunch of complicated combos, it's basically just free advantage in any deck that's able to comfortably fit it in, which is why the Dogmatika engine has seen so much success in competitive environments.